Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Burger Time. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that thing I dealt with about 10 years ago, no, more than that. It was 1996, I think it was. I worked on a game called Doom. You may have heard of this. Uh, Doom was, of course, the game built by id Software and released uh, on many, many platforms. But the story is that, well, to be quite honest, is that I was doing a bunch of games for 3DO because at that particular point in time, I had, I'm trying to remember everything because it's been so long ago. After leaving Interplay, I got a business partner, and the two of us formed a company called Logicware. And with some other ex-Interplay employees and some other people that got together, we all formed this big company. And we started doing first amusement park software and doing this thing called Your Day at the Park for Busch Gardens. But then later on, which was all based on Laserdiscs of all things, and then later on, we then started doing back to video games, where I was doing a bunch of ports for Mac Play. Well, eventually, I did the port for Wolfenstein 3D for the 3DO, and that got me a lot of attention. Well, everyone at 3DO was hoping to get Doom on that platform. And unbeknownst to me at this particular point in time, another company called Art Data Interactive gave id Software a boatload of money. I was under the impression it was somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000, which, remember, 1996, that's a lot of money. It's like saying licensing Doom for $1 million to $2 million today, just to use the name. Not unheard of, but for a game console known as a 3DO, which really wasn't that popular, even though it was hyped up to no one's business. Oh, let's see. Looking at the chat line here, it says here, 13 Friday Girl is at work, but hi. Someone's hosting me for viewer. Cool. But back to what I was saying. I was working on Wolf 3D, and Art Data Interactive went ahead and got the rights to Doom, and the CEO of Art Data Interactive was a newbie. From what I understood, is that he raised money from fellows at his church, of all places. And he convinced them to give him several $100,000 to form a video game company, and they were going to call it Art Data Interactive. And since the biggest thing of all that particular time was the 3DO, which, I already had done the 3DO buffet, I had already worked on Wolfenstein 3D, I did Out of This World for a remake of Out of This World on the 3DO. So 3DO already knew my company Logicware was really, really adept at making 3DO ports, that they came to us and say, hey, can you help this company out? This company was telling us that they already have a version of Doom working with new levels, new monsters, new weapons and everything, but they just need a little technical help in order to get it out to market. Now, that's my specialty, is taking games that are nearly finished and finishing them, figuring out where the optimizations are, where the stuff to do. Well, talk to the CEO of Art Data. He backed up everything 3DO said. New games already in the works, etc., but just need some technical help. And I said, so when do you need it done? He says, I need it done by Christmas. Well, this talk was like in August. And to ship something in Christmas, you have to have it finished no later than October, preferably September. But October is like the drop dead time, because you then have to get it through QA, then you have to go through submissions with, in this case, 3DO, then you have to press the discs, then you have to mail them to all the stores in order to get these games on the store shelves by that dreaded Thanksgiving weekend, Black Friday. So here it is, beginning of August. They need this game out by Christmas. That's not very many months. I mean, that's August. It's August, September, October, November. I mean, it's really 3 months. But if it's just a fix of code and so forth, 3 months is very doable, easily fixed. I usually do a job like that in 2-3 weeks. So I then said, great, signed the contract, said, let's get going. And sure enough, I'm sitting there going like, well, when am I going to get the source code? And I get contacted by the CEO of our data. Says, oh no, just start working on the game right now. And I'm like, how could I start working on the game if I don't have anything? He sends me a copy of Doom on the PC, on a floppy disk, and says, start with this. And my jaw hit the ground when I got this disk, because I got the disk and I put it in the disk drive thinking I was going to get the source code. Instead, I find the executables, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's what I already have on my hard drive. I mean, I've been playing Doom for like a couple of years already. Pretty much everybody has a copy of Doom at that time. I mean, it's a shareware game. It's not like you have to buy it. You just download it from anywhere. And I then call up, our data going like, this isn't what I need. I need the source code. And this went back and forth for like about a week. And then a friend of mine who works at Art Data, his name was Tristan Anderson, contacted me and let me know that we don't have the source. And that's when I'm going like, if you don't have the source, so I call up in a panic my friends at 3DO, and I talked to my producer. He wasn't really a producer of this game directly. He was our account representative over at 3DO, and he was then telling me that, well, there's nothing we could do about it other than you need to get this version of the game from 3DO, the one that they've been sending us screenshots of and hyping it on all these magazines, because there was a whole stack of magazines, 3DO Magazine, PC Gamer, IGM. I mean, the games that were, the magazines around the time, Electronic is Monthly, I think EG Monthly. I'm trying to remember all the names because it has been like, see, it was 1996. So it's been about 20 years since this happened. So my memory is a little fuzzy, but the thing was, I actually have at the time magazines that had the CEO of Art Data holding a CD and saying, "I've got the beta version of Doom for the 3DO that's got these new weapons, new stuff." So I see these ads, so it's like, well, everybody's telling me this, but I can't start the game from just a copy of Doom that you bought in the store. Now, trust me, I have done ports like that, where I got a copy of the game from the store and was told I need to put this on a collection, but that's not what I'm being contracted to do here. So what happens next was that I then call up my friends at id and talk to John Carmack, and he then said, well, I have no idea what's going on. All I knew is that they just bought a license from us and we sent them a copy of the source, and that was the end of it. He says, well, can you send me a copy of the source? And sure thing. So a day later, I got this FedEx package, and it had on it this little CD, which I still have. I actually should pull up the CD, but it's a CD of the source code. In fact, it was two CDs. One CD was the source code to the PC version of Doom, which is, right now you could download anywhere from the internet because it's pretty much what he uploaded to SourceForge, and of course put up, not SourceForge, first on the id site is just a zip file, and later on ends up on GitHub, etc. But that was the first disc. The second disc has a complete archive of the Jaguar version of Doom. Hi versus 3DO Planet. Yes, Doom. So I take the CD with the copy of Jaguar Doom, and I then spend the next 2 days just getting myself to build the code, get the Jaguar development software running, everything. And I'm able to say, okay, great. I've got a copy of Doom that works on a console, the Jaguar. But this is still Doom, the original Doom. And I have all these magazines again saying, here's the new version with all the new stuff. So it's like, where's all this stuff? So then I end up having to drive down to Art Data Interactive when they were up in west, was it Rancho Chatsworth, somewhere around there? There was west of LA, northwest of LA. I remember that part. But it was a long drive because my office for Logical was based in Covina, California. It was like 2062 East Arrow Highway, if I can remember correctly. But I had to go all the way across town to go ahead and see him. And then I confronted him. And he then says he should showed me the art they had. And it was all JPEGs. It was Photoshop. And it was like Photoshop 1 back then. I think it was, you were using something called Studio 32. That's what it was. It was a art tool, basically Photoshop. And he had somebody draw shots of what he thought would look like cool for a new version of Doom. And of course they did that, and that's the pictures they were passing around to everybody. And I says, so you don't have a copy of this game? So I was like, yeah, you do. Here's the pictures. That's when it dawns on me. This guy did not know at all how games made. He had literally no clue. He really thought all I had to do was copy the code from a store-bought version of Doom and just copy it onto a 3DO and work. And that you could take JPEGs of new art and just copy it in there and the weapons are. He really thought game creation was that easy. And I informed him that no, it's not how it works. But at this point, I then take what JPEGs he had, what little there was of it, drive back to the office, and I get right on the phone to 3DO. And it says, well, this project's over. It's dead. And because I can't do this. There's no way in hell I'm going to be able to make this deadline. I can do a port. I could make a brand new game, but of course, the earliest I can get it for you is Christmas 1997, not Christmas 1996. Ain't going to happen. Well, my friend at 3DO, bless his heart, begged and pleaded with me to figure out a way of getting Doom on the 3DO in time for Christmas. And I'm saying, of course, I asked him why. And the whole thing was they had already, 3DO itself was already getting all this positive press that Doom was coming out on their platform. There's nothing they could do about the fact that art data was involved, but at least they knew that a competent developer was going to be involved, so the game had a chance of at least shipping. So I said, all right, but all I could promise you is the Jaguar version of the game. I'm just going to take the data from the Jaguar version, because it's already been reduced from memory, it's already been reduced in size, it's already been, converted to begin with to fit in a memory map, because it was running on a Jaguar. Jaguar only had a megabyte of memory, where the 3DO had 2. So it fits. I didn't have to deal with redoing all the art or the assets, because if I had to do that, there was no way in hell I would ever get this port done. It was just physically impossible. But what I did was I took the data, prepared a project, got all the Jaguar code done, converted over to using Burgerlib. That took a few days. And after that, I had that version of the game running on the Mac. So I was able to play the game, render, play, everything's going, software rendering. But at least I said, okay, I've got a game running. But then that's when I realized, oh shit, they had a custom sound driver for the Jaguar version. And the Mac version, the prototype I did, had no sound. There was no sound. I'm not even just bang, bang, nothing. Because I was just trying to get the code, the visuals working, etc. like that. So that's when I told our data, okay, I'm going to deliver you Doom. And that's all I promised. Of course, they were expecting new levels, because even as I told them, don't tell people you have no levels. No. And I then showed him some mock screenshots and stuff of the game, but of course he thought the Jaguar version was all new levels. So he said, yeah, the game's going to have custom levels made specifically for the 3DO. And I said, no, that's the Jaguar version. But, not my problem. Not my problem. So the middle of August was when I finally had a version of the code that was running on a Mac based on the Jaguar version. And that's when at that point I said, all right, how am I going to get this thing done in time for Christmas? It's going to be the quickest, dirtiest, cheesiest hack port I've ever done Well, then again, not really. I have done others. I will probably use that as a topic of another show. But I then said, well, I'm going to roll my sleeves up. Thankfully, I got 3DO to guarantee that we're going to get paid, because that was one of the other contingencies. And I realized that when I saw our data that, am I even going to get paid for this? Because their office is really small. They, with the guy who didn't even know anything about game business and so forth, it's like, is he going to be such a sleaze bag that he's going to, promise me all this money? And we got our initial payment, the upfront advance, just a small advance of the entire contract. So at least I had some money. So even if he decided to weasel out, but at the same time, I was really trying to get in really good graces with 3DO. So I said, okay, fine, let's do this. So I started working on the game. And because I found out about the sound driver, I then called up our data and says, look, there's no way in hell I'm going to get music in here. However, what if you did this? What if we take all the tracks of Doom, the music, and you have a band play them? So I took the music and I placed it on a cassette tape. I kid you not. I just took Doom for the PC, just started the game and just let the music play, then went to another level, let the music play, and so forth, and made a tape like it was about an hour long. And then I had it sent over to Art Data. And Art Data, thankfully, the CEO was actually a guitarist. And he had a bunch of friends, and they had a little band. So they went into their garage for the next 3 weeks while I was working on Doom, cutting tracks, laying them down. And every few days I would get a new track FTP to me, or in some cases sent to me on one or two floppies. Or sometimes it was a CD in the mail. In fact, I still have some of the CDs that were sent. It says like Doom E1M0.AIF, because we use uncompressed AIFF files for. Whoops, here. Yeah, it was AIFF files is how the data was. That's why if you look at the Doom archive that I put up on GitHub, all the files are AIFF uncompressed, because that is the original files that were put in. And I decided I'll put up the uncompressed ones, because the fact that, even though what shipped in the game was AIFC files, because they were compressed to fit on the 3DO, the raw files are all AIFF 44 kilohertz stereo. I worked my butt off. I took all the art of the game, converted it to lower palettes, converted them into 3DO cells. Because originally my first pass of the game was to use software rendering, I went ahead and got the whole game running, using the old Doom software rendering engine on the 3DO, but it was only running at 3 frames per second. And after I optimized the crap out of it on some of the assembly functions in ARM assembly, I got it up to around 10 frames a second, give or take. But the whole thing is that, okay, the game's running at 10 frames per second. I'm about 2 weeks away now, because it's been about, actually, take it back. At this point, it's been about a month worth of work. So I'm now like 5 weeks left before we're supposed to ship. But at this point, I got a version of the game that's fully functional. You start the game, just go straight into Doom. There's no intermediate screens, there's no load saves, or nothing like that. Which then I was able to set it off to 3DO. And when I sent it to 3DO, they were excited as all get out. They didn't think anybody would even get the game that far. Because, they saw the game was stable and relatively bug-free. I had to make extensive modifications to the Doom engine. In fact, I got to the point where several sections were remade, in which this became the technology that inspired me to do the engine that I wrote for Killing Time, a project I did after doing 3DO Doom. And there's many things in Killing Time that you could see were really inspired by what came from Doom, but there was a lot of things I took in different directions because I had to fit things in memory. And that was one of the biggest problems I had with the original Doom engine, was that Doom, Carmack just simply was a little lazy, in which he just allocated static buffers, and if data went to the static buffer, if you overflowed it just crashed. So if you had over 3,000 polygons, crash. If it had over 4,000 walls in a rendering scene. Crash. That's the answer to everything. In my case, I rewrote, or in this, I actually wrote from scratch a section of the code, which as it's rendering things, I just have a giant buffer and I just fill it as I need it. And so therefore, if you have a scene with a lot of polys but only a few posts, it'll still fit because it's like this. And as the memory allocates like this, you have the static, one buffer of memory, but you can put the, I can have a lot of this, a little bit more than that, a lot of this, a little bit more than that, either way, but as long as you don't fill up the memory, because if you fill up more memory, I can't do anything beyond that. But that's what I did with the technology, because what I did with Doom was just a few things about that. But when I would Killing Time, and I rewrote everything, or in many cases started from scratch, but it was like I was inspired by it. That's why if you ever look at the source code of Killing Time, which I'll probably eventually release one day, you'll see there's a lot of homages to Doom from for Killing Time's engine. But there's some glaring differences between the two. They are not the same engine. But back to Doom, is after I set this off, then I had to spend some time with some artists and so forth at Logicware creating new interface screens and so forth. Now, a lot of them we started from the Jaguar version. We took the Jaguar art, Jaguar stuff, converted it to 3DO work, 3DO art, and then put that up there. But once we got these screens up, it took me another 3 weeks to write new user interface, to use the 3DO control pad. One of the things I'm really proud of was that I did this piece of code which, when you turn the camera, it does it out logarithmically. So therefore, if you're standing still and you press the pad to start turning right, it slowly turns right, but then it starts speeding up. So the longer you hold it, the faster it goes. That way, when you get into a room and you just want some fine control, just do little taps, left, right, and the game will do some minute motion. But if you're, let's say, running like hell, you're moving fast, you hold the button, and as long as you hold it, it starts to turn, and it turns really fast. And it turned out to be a way of, this is 1996, I came up with this thing, which it really made the controls of the 3DO version of Doom actually quite fluid and quite nice, which was one of my biggest saving graces. In fact, I had a lot of people compliment me on, the frame rate kind of bites, but hey, it's sure as hell easy to play. And heck, there was even a time when id Software wanted to, when I sent them a copy of the game, they're going like, my God, the frame rate bites. We may have to cancel this. And I'm saying, look, the guys at 3DO really want this, and besides, art data, not many people are going to see it. And they go, yeah, whatever, we don't care, the check cleared. So id Software said, fine, whatever. I did do a compromise for id, because originally the game was full screen. So I made it run in a smaller screen. And because the guys at 3DO kept saying, no, we're going to come out with a new 3DO later on, then there's the M2 and so forth, so it'll run faster, so you should make it so if it detects it runs faster, make it full screen. So I left it as a cheat code, that if you wanted to, you could do a little cheat code, and what it did is that it allowed you to set the sizes bigger all the way up to the full screen. And that was intended to be for people who, hey, if you got the new 3DO Mark II or whatever model coming out, if you want to play Doom the way it was meant to be, just enter this cheat code. Of course, as we all know in history, there was never another model of 3DO. So the cheat code kind of went by the wayside. But as I was nearing completion, I got all the audio tracks. And in fact, there was supposed to be some more made, but I just got what I had, and I put them in the game. I ran out of time, so I couldn't put the little bunny at the end of the game. Instead, I ended up having to recycle a hybrid ending of Doom 2, which was where as soon as the game ends, you see the little bad guy, and you press a button, he dies, and then goes the next bad guy, press a button, he dies. Just something really cute. But it was better than absolutely nothing for an ending. Because, it is Doom. You get to the big bad guy, and in this case, it was a pentagram level with a bunch of barons of hell, and when you kill them all, then the game ends. Yes, caffeinated. So we are nearing the end of the development. Then I get this panicked phone call from the CEO of Art Data. And he's then saying, where are the new weapons? And I go, what new weapons? So it's like the ones I've been promising, the ones you promised. Like, I didn't promise anything. It says, well, yes, you did. You took the art from me. And you took those pieces and you promised me you're going to put them in the game. And I said, and I come to find later he was recording my conversation, hoping to get me to say something so he can then try to sue me or blame me for the shitstorm that might happen later on. Thankfully, there wasn't really a shitstorm, but he did, his company did end. But finished up the game, got it going. I had this long list of things like, you know what, it would have been nice if I had more time, but I can't finish this. Examples are the sprites and the vertical walls in Doom were actually rendered using the hardware. It was really tricky, but I got the hardware to render it. But the flats, the floor and ceiling tiles, the 3DO's hardware to render a polygon doesn't do perspective correction. So I ended up having to use software to render those lines horizontally. If you look inside the source code of 3DO Doom, in fact, let me see if I can find that here. Let's see, that would be under floors. See, everybody, my home audience, you want to see some source code? Yeah, come on. I know you wanna. Let's see, that's the actual. Let's see, where's the draw functions? dmain, asm. Ah, yes, there it is. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to show a little bit of source code because I rolled that way. Yep, I'm getting some source. Okay, then, here is some source. Ready? Have the mines get destroyed. Here we go. Now we're going to go into magical source code land. In fact, let me change over to using code from Microsquish because I can then zoom in. Let's see here again. I got to learn. See, Control plus. So Control plus. Okay, here we go. This is the actual span routines that I wrote for 3DO Doom. As you can see, here's the game 3DO Doom. In fact, we fill up the screen here and again zoom in a little bit more so the home audience could read this. What's going on is this. In Doom, the numbers for the X and Y coordinates into a texture are known as fixed point. Now, most times people think of floating point numbers like 1.5 or 2.6 or whatever it is, and you type that in, and of course it turns into a floating point number, and you can work with it. Well, the problem is the 3DO does not have floating point at all. And in fact, that was kind of like one of the things that drove me insane. But then again, I've always been driven to insanity. Instead, what the 3DO uses, as well as most PCs at the time, was what we call fixed point. Fixed point is where you take a 32-bit hex number, and normally that would be 1. The hex number 1. So you'd be something like int, foo equals 1, and that'd be 1. The trouble is, what if we built into a fraction? Foo's 32-bit, so we can represent 0. That's a 32-bit number, or the maximum. So now, this number here is 4 million. And of course, that's 0. But what if we did something really interesting here? What if we took this number and split it in half? We treated this as 0. And this is a fraction, in which this is 0, and then we add in the fraction 0 over 65536. Now, why is this 65536? Because 4 digits in hex is the numbers 0 through 65535, because that equals 0 to OXFFF. So we've got a fraction here. We got 0 over 0. Well, as you see here, there's 1.5. int foo 1.5 would be 0x or 0, 0, 1, because that's 1.0, and then hex 8, because that turns into 1 with 32768 over 65536, or 0.5. So, as I was going with this example, int 1.5 equals ox 1 0 0 0 1 x. Okay. Now this little math example of why fixed point numbers work is very crucial, because the way you do things when you're scanning from a piece of art is when you draw a piece of art one-to-one, you want to step 1 pixel at a time. So you'd have, let's say, a piece of art that's a bunch of X's, but if I want to draw it as is, I only want to step 1.0 times 1.0. Means that every time I want to draw onto the screen, this is a screen, I want to take these as x, 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 x. In fact, let me do a better example here. I'm going to pretend these are pixels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's going to be some image we're pretending here. We're really using our imaginations, everyone here. And we want to draw it one-to-one. So we want to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But what if I want to take this image and get closer to it? So I want to scale it up. I want to draw 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. What I've just done here is that visibly, I would keep drawing like this. So I've now taken that same texture, this, and I have doubled it in size. Well, the way you do this is that you use, instead of 1.0, you draw stepping 0.5. So what I would do is I would say from the original code, I would do something like, read pixel, and it would be step shifted down by 16 bits, and then step plus equals delta, and then read pixel, step 16. And keep doing that over and over again. The delta here is either 1.0 or 1.5 if I want to make it smaller, or 0.5 if I want to make it bigger. But one of the tricks I had to deal with when I'm doing code for the textures in Doom is that what if the texture is only 64 by 64? That means if this step gets bigger than 64, which is 0 to 30f, it will wrap around or go to the next pixel or some goofy thing like that. Well, I came up with this interesting little trick. What I did is that 0 to 3f is only 6 bits. So what if I made a fixed point number that instead of being 16 by 16 fixed point, I made it 6.22, which is 16 plus 10. Actually, it's 26. 16, 26. Sorry. There's a number. It's still 32 bits. 6 plus 26 is 32 bits. But my fraction's 26. The upper bits are 6. So whenever I do the add, if it wraps around in any direction, doesn't matter. It's always going to be on the texture. Well, that's where this draw span comes in. How many pixels I want to draw, the X and Y coordinate into the texture where I'm going to start, the step of both the X and Y as I draw along the scan, and of course finally the texture itself. So here is the wonderful ARM code, and here's where I say 280 because that's the maximum number of lines, so therefore I don't have to, what I'm doing here is it's a macro which repeats over and over again. And I actually jump in the middle of this code in order to do what I want to do. But what I do here is I say, see the 26? See a 20? what I'm doing is that I take the, let's see here, this was, I'm trying to remember the registers. Was this one? Let me try to see where's the set A, store A, set A, jump this, while F this, and, okay, here's the shift, add, because V2 is the original register to store with. Yeah, here's where I take the, because V3 is a texture. Yeah, that's the texture right there. Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm creating 4 different offsets into the texture. So I take the, see, it would be the Y, shifted down. I take the Y, shifted down by the mask, shifted up by 20 bits. Here's the X coordinate, where all I do is I just take the X coordinate, or it with the original pixel, shift it down by 26, merge the 2 values together, do this again, do this again, do this again. Here's where I actually read the 4 bytes of the textures. Because of the way the 3DO works, I have to read them by bytes. This is actually supposed to be 16 bits. 16 bits. And then I mix them all together, write it to memory. It's actually, this store means I'm writing a 32-bit value plus 4. And then here's where I do the loop. But here's the main entry for the span code. This actually will probably melt your brain if I go ahead and speak about it, but this is where I use the filler macro. Oh yes, the filler was the a macro for run fills, and that's the return address. But the whole thing I was doing is that I wanted to negate the need for doing something where I would take X, shifted down by 26, and I would take Y, shifted down by 20, and that would get me the, texture equals something like that. Because I was doing the X shifted down, that means I never have to AND the top part. This one, unfortunately, is that when I did shift it down, I had to mask off the upper bits because it was the spot that occupied this, the X core. Actually, no, it was the other way around. I'm trying to remember. I have to really look at the code again. But you see what the trying to do here. Now, one of the things, because I was hard coding it to 26, it meant that all textures in 3DO Doom, don't save. Let me get out of here and get back to be on live TV here. Whoops. There we go. I went ahead and made all textures for the floor and ceilings in 3DO Doom 64 by 64. So some of the textures in the original game were bigger, some were smaller. I've changed them all to 64 by 64 and hard coded that way, so that the game didn't need to worry about multiple texture sizes. But again, it was one of those compromises I had to do just to get this game done. Someone asks, how to completely turn off floor and ceiling rendering in 3DO Doom? Well, that's very simple. This function here, don't call it. Just don't call it at all. Then you don't draw it. And if you don't draw it, then you don't see anything. Just so you know, that function drew directly into the original frame buffer of the 3DO. One of the weird things about the 3DO was that, unlike other frame buffers that I work with where the memory is all linear, the 3DO was actually the first 16 bits was the first pixel, the upper left corner pixel, but then the next 16 bits was actually pixel directly below it. And then it was like, so it was drawing 2 scan lines at a time when it was rendering a frame, which is one of the reasons why the rendering buffer, the rendering code you saw there, was actually rendering 2 pixels at a time, was in order for me to only try to write to video memory as little as possible, because I was doing 2 spans at the same time. Someone asked, why was it needed to remove width and height parameters from cell textures before packing them into res file? That's because everything was already 64 by 64. Since I already knew 64 by 64 for everything, I just hard coded that in when I was generating the cells. So internally in the 3DO, as part of the question, which was why was the game data that shipped on the 3DO game didn't have any width and height information for the textures, it was because since every texture was 64 by 64, that would be redundant if I added that data in there. My biggest problem I had with the 3DO was I needed to get as much stuff I could into memory. Memory was a premium. I remember when they were first designing the 3DO and they told me about the device and they said, that, oh yeah, it's going to ship with like 1 megabyte of memory. But then they talked about this operating system they're going to put into it, so they ended up shipping it with 2, then eventually 3 megabytes of memory, although you really only could use 2. Somebody was asking here on the questions, because I'm now going to open up the questions here. Someone says, to me, EA was at its best when it was stewarded by Trip Hawkins. Post-Hawkins, EA lost its charm. Have you any experience with Hawkins while developing 3DO, Doom, etc.? Actually, no. I had my experiences with Trip Hawkins when he was at EA, when I was doing things like Bard's Tale and stuff like that. But after he left to go form 3DO, I honestly was just one of the people in the trenches, and he was more interested in hobnobbing with CEOs of major corporations than to talk to a CTO of a very small dev studio in Covina, California. And of course, during my tenure at Interplay, I was more content being essentially the equivalent of locked up in a room in the back writing code, and not really that interested in doing any forward-facing or business-facing things during those years of my career. Becky Face. Hi, someone for 13 Friday Girl writes, Morrigan here, just here to say that you rock. Aw, thank you. Okay, Versus 3DO Planet says, but all main menu graphics also don't have width and height. Okay, that's a misnomer. The graphics in 3DO Doom that shipped was all cells. And because they were cells, they had the prefix of the cell data. I think it was like a 36-byte header, which is rendered by hardware. Well, the width and height is in there. So because I was giving it the actual cell description, there was no need to add any extra data. So it was the cell data, then it was an offset pointer to the pixel data itself, and I just simply passed that as a pointer to the cell engine and just drew that. I had a tool called Slicer that I wrote, which I still maintain today, and it still has the 3DO code in it, which says, yeah, if you tell it to slice for cell, it will take the art data, reduce it down, convert it to 3DO cell data, and then generate the appropriate header with everything offset and relative. So all you have to do is put it there. Someone writes, the file format WAD files inside res file differs from the PC WAD. Is there any converter available? No, it's a different tool. And I actually actually just recently found the source to that tool. It's something that's on my long list of things I got to put up on open source projects. In fact, if anything, I'm going to put that into a folder called Tools for 3DO Doom. One of my things I'm doing now is that now that I've got this build process of taking older code and putting it in places, like I've got the original Battle Chess EGA done this format, I've got Space Ace done this way, in which I'm going to put up there, what's it called? Yeah, everything on 3DO Doom, I'm going to update with all the tools and stuff like that. One of the things you may have noticed, my readers or my viewers, is that several of my Python tools I already uploaded onto the Python shared thing. So if you could just do easy install space burger and easy install space make projects in a Python shell, it'll automatically install the stuff for you. And if you want to, you could just go onto GitHub and you can actually see the original source. And it literally is a mirror of what I've got on my hard drive. Someone asked, Gamma Dev, there is a long-standing rumor that the version of Doom that was published was not your final build, but a beta. Any truth? I don't believe that's true. I believe it was the final version. But just a reminder, the game sucked. I'm the author of it, and I will flat out tell you that game sucked. The problem is that with the process to get something manufactured with 3DO is that once I make a golden master, I have to use this tool called, gosh, it was like there's a folder called Take Me I have to create. I'm trying to remember all the stuff I did on the 3DO, but I remember I had to make a folder called Take Me, and then there's a special tool which creates an image file. That image file I then send to 3DO, who then they run with their testers, and only when their testers say this game is good for manufacturing, they then take it to this little black room somewhere in the 3DO labs, which actually does the encryption. And they kept it only like I understand only had like 5 or 6 people actually had access to that room, and the intent was that the encryption keys were like, if they ever leaked, then anybody can make 3DO discs. So once they made the encrypted discs, they gave us an ISO back, which was what is we can manufacture. We can take this special ISO. When we look at it, it's gibberish. It's total garbage. However, though, that is the file we burn on the CDs, and then we can put them onto a 3DO multiplayer, and it would run. And that's all because the 3DO multiplayer on startup only will read encrypted disks. So the in order for anyone to take a beta version, they would still need to send it to 3DO for encryption, who in turn can release it to manufacturer. So anybody out there releasing a beta version that would have to get past 3DO's TRC. So, you know, and what they did ship, I look at the game and it had my cheat codes in it and everything. But I am not going to sit here and say ever that the version of 3DO Doom was one of my better ports. It's actually one of my worst ports in my entire career. Let's see here. Someone writes, Versus 3DO Planet writes, how long was Doom compilation process on Apple II? I never released Doom on the Apple II. So, and quite frankly, it's Doom on the Apple II. Unless you've got an accelerated 2GS running at least 20 megahertz, it's going to be even a worse port than the 3DO version. Unless you want Doom running in like a little tiny window. I mean, that's possible. Like little, like, 40 by 20 window, but at that point, where's the fun in that? Let's see here. Someone writes, Epix911 writes, sorry about not directly source code question, more about a historical game dev question based on your Interplay EA time. I absolutely love Danny Button's games. I still feel among the influential of all time. Any interaction with Danny, anyone you drew inspiration from at your level you could banter dev chat with. Oh, well, I met Danny Button several times in my career. Most of the time, I knew Danny before she was Danny. But however, Danny was, I always knew is when I met him at the time, was very sad. And just, I knew something was off. But of course, it's kind of like one of those little nicknames we call like transdar. A trans person can tell another trans person's around. But of course, at the time, I wasn't telling anybody who I was. I was not gonna. I was keep my little secret. But then later on, I met Danny only once, and that was in passing at a GDC. And sad story was I was invited to an Apple II party at Ion Storm in 1998. And so me and a couple of friends of mine, we flew down to Dallas, and we were going to go ahead and party with all these Apple II luminaries. Thank you, John Romero, for hosting that party. But one of the highlights of the show was Danny Button was supposed to be there. But only a few weeks before the party was supposed to happen, we got the news Danny Button died. So I actually felt really bad during that time because I really wanted to just have some quiet time with her and just talk to her about her experiences and so forth. Mostly because I may have come out to her for all I know. But neither here nor there, it never happened. Next. Oh, as far as banter and dev chat, most of the times I would be talking to John Carmack. John and I would talk about code. We talked for hours, especially during the early 90s when he was working both at SoftDisk, because I was doing a lot of ports for SoftDisk back then. And then afterwards, when they founded id and were originally working in Wisconsin, I talked with him about that. But we really kind of parted ways somewhere around the mid-90s when he really got, I think it was around the time when he and Romero parted ways. That's when Carmack was just more focused on cars and stuff like that, and I was busy doing stuff with Contraband Entertainment. Um, but other people of that nature, of that time period, it was Jim Sproul at Interplay, who he and I had many, many hours. Charles Deenan, he and I would talk for many hours about audio programming. Um, see, it was Tim Kaine. I spoke with him for many hours, but there was quite a few very smart people. Now, Faster Kitty asks, "What do you think is your best port?" Out of This World for the Super Nintendo and Out of This World for the 3DO. Those, I think, are my best ports I've ever done. A close second would be like my port of Ultima 1, my ports and actual original games of Bard's Tale, the Bard's Tale trilogy. In fact, two of my better ports I really wanted to see the light of day but never did was Wasteland and Bard's Tale 3 for the Apple IIgs. I was working extensively on both of those versions when we got the word from EA that thou shalt not release another Wasteland or Bard's Tale product ever. Versus 3DO Planet asks, how the debugger 3DO looks like. Do you have it? Okay, I once owned a 3DO dev kit. I had since sold it to a collector in France about a decade ago. I have not seen another dev kit since, but the biggest problem with the dev kit is that in order for you to use it, you have to have a Mac, a 68K Mac, or a PowerPC upgraded Mac, but it has to have a new bus slot. And those are really old Macintoshes. We're talking here mid-90s. The new bus slot was needed because they had a specialized card that plugs into your Mac, which was a fiber optic serial connector. That serial connector plugs into what looks like a giant PC, because it was a standard PC case, and that was the dev kit. The debugger was running on the Mac. It uses the fiber optic lines to communicate with the 3DO, and then it stepped debugged. It was using their own proprietary debugger. It wasn't even GDB, because I didn't even think GDB was even around at that time. But it allowed me to, using their custom debugging software, to step, trace, source code debug, everything, all the stuff I was doing on 3DO. Today, in order for you to do any of that, even if you somehow got the software, which I do believe I might have a couple of CDs lying around with that software on it, but it's useless without the hardware. The software for 3DO debugging, there was no software emulator. It was all done in hardware. It was all done using a new bus equipped Mac with a fiber optic line to a 3DO dev kit. I would love it if somebody could find me a 3DO dev kit so I can get back to working on it, at least to play with it. But really, I think that you're better off just seeing if a 3DO emulator developer would just add in GDB support or something like that, so that you can actually have a true PC-based debugger that would probably run about 20 to 50 times faster. Because don't forget, the 3DO's CPU is only a 12 megahertz ARM6, which today might as well be the equivalent of saying it's a high-speed Apple IIgs. Epix911 asks, Bard's Tale 3 for the Apple IIgs would have been amazing. How far along were you with the development of Bard's Tale 3 on the GS? Simple. The game was running. The game was running fine. I just didn't have the artwork. I was using some of the monster art from Bard's Tale 1 and 2, but all the custom things like the refugee camp, some of the other the creatures from it was Gelidia and Tarmidia, the one which is the World of War. In fact, I'm trying to remember it. They were using art that I would probably have recycled stuff from Wasteland, for crying out loud. But unfortunately for me, is that I only had the Apple II and C64 art. And, of course, all the Apple II GS and PC art that we had done over at Interplay. So I was originally starting with the Apple II GS art. I had the game Bard's Tale 3 using the Apple II GS Bard's Tale 2 art. But when it came time for me to ask for art resources to start getting the art done, that's when we had the word come down, we're not going to work on Bard's Tale anymore. And I was already using up all my art resources doing art for Dragon Wars. So I either had to assign my artist to do the art for Bard's Tale, and pray and hope that we'd be able to convince EA to let us ship this game, or I would have to continue with Dragon Wars. Now, of course, granted, at the time that was called Bard's Tale 4. So we were doing Bard's Tale 4, had all my art resources on it, and then this all came down, and there was a huge reorganization. But in the meantime, I had to archive my code for Wasteland and archive my code for Bard's Tale. And then that was the last I ever saw of that. Now, granted, I still have the archives, which is one reason why I'm able to do this new port that I'm doing for In Exile for the Bard's Tale 4, which, by the way, just to let you know, I'm not involved with Bard's Tale 4. I'm only just doing this report of the original 3 games. So who knows, maybe I might get involved with it later, but at this precise moment in time, I'm not. Let's see here. Epix911 writes, I had a 3DO dev kit when I left EA in the late 90s. Sadly, no more. Yep, sadly, no more here too. I know they exist. Unfortunately, certain collectors are not willing to part with them. And sadly, unless I get a new bus card, the fiber optic cable, the dev kit, and a Mac, an ancient Mac that has a new bus card slot, all those components, if any one of those components is missing, you've got paperweights. Next one is versus 3DO Planet. Are you going to release your own 3DO or other 3DO titles? It'll be very interesting to learn how different 3DO games work. Wolf 3D for 3DO, I will definitely be releasing. That is a given. The other games, I got to actually do some clearances first, because Shadowin and Kingdom of the Far Reaches, I probably could get those out. But I need to ask for permissions for those first. Like Doom and Wolf, I already had permission from years ago for that. But for Casper is one where I have to verify whether or not I'm in copyright infringement land if I release a game with assets from Casper the Friendly Ghost. Battle Chess, more likely I'll release Battle Chess. And someone writes, by the way, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be having to end the questions very soon. So Versus 3DO Planet writes, can you remember the funniest event during the development for 3DO? Funny. Well, there was a story on development of 3DO, but I wouldn't call it funny because it was more painful than funny. I did Wolfenstein 3D. I went ahead and made the master disc, prepared it all off, sent it off to Interplay. Because this is Logic we're doing this. I wasn't working in Interplay at the time. Interplay then sent it to QA. QA then signed off on the game. Now, part of QA is you're supposed to start the game and play the game from start to finish and verify everything's cool. Well, they then went ahead and sent it off to 3DO. 3DO verified the game actually ran, didn't crash, etc. They too signed off on it. They manufactured somewhere around 10,000 discs, 10, 20,000, somewhere around there. And then immediately after the game started selling, people were saying, hey, by the time I got to level 30 or 35, the game would crash. I would open this door, game crashes. Well, it turns out that I went ahead and, once I got a report of the bug, I went ahead and looked at the data and found out that somehow, when I manufactured the disc, I had made an error in the data. The game, you could not, it literally was, you open the door, it would, as it tries to render the BSP tree, it would go to a bad node and die. There was absolutely no way in the world you could have played the game past level 30. Which meant, wait a minute, how did this pass QA? And that's when people at Interplay then realized that, oh, the QA people were kind of busy, so they just signed off on it after playing like 10 levels. No one actually played the game from the beginning to the end. I understood someone probably got fired for this because Interplay ended up having to recall those CDs and reissue new ones with the fix. So that was kind of sad. I mean, I was going yeah, somehow the data, somewhere in the transfer, that's what happens. I mastered the disk, but somewhere along the line, bad data got in there because all they did is I just remastered the disk and it popped out with no errors. So that was really funny. Let's see here. Now, someone, Epix911 is asking, last question for me. Dragons of the Rip. I have maybe missed it, but when is the rough launched window for the Kickstarter? Really looking forward to this. We're currently shooting for now. We pushed it back a couple of weeks because we wanted to make things a little bit nicer on it. But we're looking at the beginning of the month, beginning of August. So we're going to do the thing. Now, you please like our Facebook page. Please like or follow on Twitter, Old School, OLDESKUUL. In fact, I'm going to type it in here. Let's see, follow Old School. Follow Burger Becky. And you can, of course, follow me here on Twitch TV. But we will be making announcements, and we will also have a Twitch TV launch event to basically say, hey, everybody, we're launching our game, and we really hope you would contribute to it because, we really would like to make a brand new RPG. Okay, let's see here. And someone who's green color. Wallcop. Wallcop, all I could say is that for some reason Twitch TV is showing your name in a very bright green color that I could barely read. But anyways, I have now hit my limit on time. But the one thing I wanted to mention about the 3DO, which I should mention about the art data, after finishing Doom for 3DO and having it pressed and ready for release, I then come to find out that the Art Data Interactive pressed something in the neighborhood of 50,000 copies of Doom, despite the fact that 3D themselves said, don't make more than 5,000 copies initially, and then if it sells out, make another run. But he was so desperate to make money, and he was so convinced that all you have to do is just put a game in a box and it just sells. He made 50,000 copies, which gives you an idea. At the time, the top-selling game on the 3D was about 50,000 copies. So, needless to say, he ended up with a lot of copies of Doom that probably ended up in a landfill. Probably sitting next to Atari 2600 ET or Raiders Lost Ark, keeping him company. Who knows? But anyways, everybody out there in Twitch TV land, I just wanted to say thank you very much for wasting your time with me for the last hour. And that the next installment will not be happening on Sunday the 19th, only because on that day I am moving from one apartment to another. So I will be doing the next installment 2 weeks from today, in which it will be on Sunday the 26th. So it won't be on Sunday the 19th. It'll be Sunday the 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And right now as it is, my planned topic would be probably Bard's Tale. But however, though, if anybody has suggestions, please say it in the box or on my YouTube channel at Burger Becky, and might change my mind. Also, please give me ideas on what sort of topics to talk about in the future, both on gaming history as well as code, because I know some of you like that. And subscribe to my YouTube channel, okay? Press that subscribe button. So hopefully hear from you all soon, and thank you very much, and till next time.